All right, ladies and gentlemen, again, greetings and welcome to our ACRU, American Constitutional Rights Union, webinar series seminar. This month, we are discussing a very key issue for the constitutional rights of the American citizen, and that's the assault on the Second Amendment. I want you to think about this. Next week is going to be April the 19th, and it was on 1775, April the 19th, when the shot was fired that was heard around the world. And of course, that was the engagement between the American patriots, the Sons of Liberty, and the British as they had landed and were marching inland toward Concord, Massachusetts. And what was the mission of the British as they were marching inland? Was to destroy the weapons and armaments factory that was supplying those Sons of Liberty there in Massachusetts. And so when our nation finally won its independence and had to sit down and understand what it meant to have a individual Bill of Rights, because that was one of the things that each one of the colonies, now states, wanted to have, they realized that you have these First Amendment rights, the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the freedom of press, the right to peacefully assemble, and the right to petition your government for redress of grievances. But what they learned on April the 19th of 1775 was so important, that an armed individual is a citizen. A disarmed individual is a subject. And that brings us to where we are today, some 48 years later, in 2023, when we see the continued assault on what is a constitutional right defined in our Bill of Rights, defined in our rule of law, and that is very simple, these words: a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. Therefore, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We're going to be joined this evening on this webinar series by Mr. Tom McHale. Tom McHale is the editor of American Handgunners magazine. And Tom McHale has also written a book called The Practical Guide to the United States Constitution. Tom has also written several other books, which include, let me find them here, The Practical Guide to Guns and Shooting, The Practical Guide to Gun Holsters for Concealed Carry, The Practical Guide to Reloading Ammunition, 30 Days to Concealed Carry Confidence, Armed and Ready, Your Comprehensive Blueprint to Concealed Carry Confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Tom McHale, the editor of American Handgunners. Tom, welcome to our ACRU webinar. How are you doing this evening?
I am great. Thanks, Colonel. Looking forward to speaking with you tonight.
Fantastic. Now, it seems to me that the language of the Second Amendment is pretty simple, but yet if for whatever reason, it continues to confound people of the progressive socialist left today, and I think it's any totalitarian tyrant that we have seen throughout history. Why is it that the left struggles with understanding that this is a constitutional right and that the language is very simple?
27 words. You would think it would be so easy. So in answer to your question, and I believe this, it's because they want to misunderstand it. And I like to tell people who ask about this that it takes no more than 3 minutes of reading the surrounding materials of the day. You know, all of the information about this debate over the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Federalist Papers and everything else to figure out what they were really talking about, if there's any ambiguity at all. I mean, look at Samuel Adams summed it up very well. The Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. Mm-hmm. I mean, does it get any clearer than that?
No, it is absolutely clear. And it was amazing to me recently, there was a Republican member of Congress who went on some leftist show, and the host of this show started hammering him saying, see, it says well-regulated. That means we need more regulations on guns, and we need more gun control. But what they failed to understand is what did the founding fathers really mean by well-regulated? Can you explain that?
Well-functioning. I mean, the classic analogy is a watch or a piece of machinery or a trained group of people. I mean, okay, I'm not even trying to be funny here, but you look at even today, that word has a very specific meaning. Jamie Lee Curtis advertises yogurt on TV, and they advertise it to well-regulate your body. Does anyone really think that's an open invitation for the federal government to get involved?
Good point.
I mean, it's just you can And the other thing that just kind of astounds me on the well-regulated front is you have to remember these people just finished a shooting war with the world's most powerful military.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of farmers, businessmen, lawyers, regular people like us picked up their own firearms and they went to war to escape overt regulation and regulation without representation. I mean, how could you possibly think that they would want to write in the very first thing they do after this war is to say we need more government regulation?
No, that's
I
a
just
great.
can't understand it.
No, it's a great point. And so, what I always get people to understand is that on April the 19th of 1775, there was no United States Army. There was
Mhm.
no United States Navy, no United States Marine Corps. All of those services came much later. June 1775 for the Army, October 1775 for the Navy, and November
Mhm.
1775 for the Marine Corps. So, when they talk about the well regulated militia, it's us. And I don't understand why the left cannot realize that they're not talking about people in uniform. They're not talking about the National Guard. They're talking about
Mhm.
each and every one of us, as you just articulated. Farmers, lawyers, doctors, and you even had the members of the Black Robe Regiment, pastors and ministers who came
Mhm.
down out of the pulpit and grabbed their muskets and they took off.
Yep. It's I mean, just a read through the Federalist Papers, you see discussion after discussion of we got to be careful about standing armies. We don't want to go
Mhm.
there. We want to make sure that the armed citizenry is always more powerful than any standing army we create. I mean, they literally go through the math. I forget which one it was, but uh, they weren't to be trusted. You know,
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
out of that environment.
Yeah, because that's what they saw with the Quartering Act and how the
Hmm.
British troops they were forcibly put into their homes. So there was this distrust of a standing army. It was more of a trust in the individual citizen, and therefore the next
Hmm.
part of the Second Amendment says being necessary for the security of a free state. So they understood that we had to be well trained. They understood that the militia was us, each and every one of us, and they understood that we were necessary for the security of these United States of America.
Hmm. I think I was working on uh, little report, a document that we're working with our friends over at AMAC, the Association of Mature Citizens, and I ran across a quote by Richard Henry Lee that kind of sums up this
Yeah.
point beautifully, I think. And he said, "A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves, and include all men capable of bearing arms." That doesn't sound like a description of a controlled National Guard to me.
No, it does not. And so they close it out by saying, therefore, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now,
Mhm.
here we are today in 2023, and all the things that we see happening. Now, the government is telling us how many bullets we can have. They are
Mhm.
telling us, the size of the magazines. They're trying to redefine language. How false of a flag it is when people come out and they say assault weapons, because to me, if you
Yeah.
use anything to assault someone, to attack them, that's an assault weapon. How important is it that we reclaim the language when it comes to this debate about the Second Amendment?
Critical, because statistically, and anyone can do this. I mean, anyone can go to the CDC or the FBI crime statistics and in minutes look up the figures on this. Hands and feet, and I'm not exaggerating, hands and feet are more assault weapons than rifles of any kind. When you step back and you look at year to year,
Mhm.
how people are murdered in this country, by criminals, hands and feet far outweigh rifles of any kind.
And,
Uh,
and that's the
that's
thing.
assaults in action, right?
Assault is an action, but now they try to associate assault with a thing,
Hmm.
really a semi-automatic rifle. But when you
Hmm.
really look at those statistics, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but most of these shootings out there are with handguns. Yes, you do
Yes.
have the mass shooting with the rifle, but most of the crime that is happening. Look at Chicago this past weekend; those were all handguns.
Hmm. Yeah, if you look at the round numbers, because it varies a little bit year to year, but if you look at not suicide but murder rates, round numbers 11,000 or so. The number involving rifles, and this would include shotguns, rifles of any kind, are in the hundreds. Out of that 11,000 figure, and you're exactly correct on that. It's almost all handguns, and it's almost all criminal on criminal violence in large cities. When you take out 4 or 5 of the largest cities out of the national murder rate, we drop way down to the bottom of the world list, in terms of crime statistics.
It's kind of disturbing what we have just witnessed coming out of Nashville, Tennessee, with the shooting there in the Covenant Christian Academy by a person, suffering from gender dysphoria, which is defined as a mental condition. How quickly it was that no one talked about the shooter. No one talked about that individual. As a matter of fact, it was rumored, I think it was confirmed, that CBS was passing around a note saying, do not discuss the shooter. But all of a sudden, everything is about gun control. How is it that the left can so easily shift away from what should be the real issue, protecting our schools, hardening our schools, and then the issue with the shooters, because I think you'll find mental illness flows through a lot of these. We just saw it in Louisville, Kentucky. How can we get ahead of them to prevent them from going to the same old mantra of gun control?
Well, you're exactly right. And the figures indicate that about 63% of these individuals who perform who execute mass shootings, have a documented mental illness or mental issue going on, whether it's depression, suicidal thoughts, or other things. So you're exactly right. That's what's going on. And I think the reason this one wasn't talked about is because the shooter was not an NRA member. And that sounds trite, but I think it's 100% true. It doesn't fit the narrative. The really frightening thing is we started to see chatter online about, well, it's about time, this persecuted community struck back.
Yeah.
Which is just appalling, to hear that kind of thing.
It was, because all of a sudden, Audrey Elizabeth Hale became the victim. No one talked about the 3 9-year-old children. No one talked about the 3 adults who were, killed, just gunned down innocently in that shooting. And let's talk about, the NRA membership, because I remember the shooting here in Texas at Sutherland Springs, where a dear friend of mine, Stephen Williford, was the one who stopped that rampage. He was a NRA trained firearms instructor. He picked up his AR-15 and went and neutralized the target there. How can we get to the point where we are sharing the real stories behind this? Or like Jack Phillips at the White Settlement Church of God, when, from 15 yards out, one shot, bullet to the head with a 45, 1911. How can we get these positive stories out there and defeat the left and talk more so about how people are protecting themselves by using the Second Amendment?
We have to talk amongst ourselves like we're doing now. We have to communicate amongst ourselves via means that aren't censorable, so to speak. And I know that sounds conspiracy theorist in a sense, but I'm a big believer in email, because an organization like ours, we can email people that are concerned about these issues, and it goes from us to them without a filter. Now, fortunately, we've seen some improvement in some of the social media channels, like Twitter. Seems to be becoming a little more neutral in terms of not silencing conservative voices, right? But in the meantime, email is just a great way to do that, where we can communicate with each other. So I would encourage everybody, hit the webpage, hit the acru.org and subscribe. We don't, the lists, the names stay with us. We don't share, rent, or sell those names anywhere else. And we'll send you an email about once a week, unless there's something really important happening, and then you may get another one. So stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, we have already had court decisions. One of the things the Supreme Court is supposed to do by Article 3 of the Constitution is to interpret the law. And so we have had several cases, the Heller versus DC case, and then the McDonald versus the City of Chicago cases. Can you talk about those 2 court cases, the decisions that were rendered, and why they should put to rest all of this infringement upon the Second Amendment?
Sure, sure. And I like to think of those as almost building blocks in the long-term recovery of our natural God-given right, to self-defense. The Heller case happened to be in D.C., so it was a little bit unusual that D.C. is not a state, right? So what the Heller case did for us was very clearly established that yes, an individual has a right to have a firearm for self-defense in the home. At that time, DC was saying, yeah, it must be stored in a safe and disassembled and not usable. And Heller's like, wait a minute, it's completely unusable for defensive purposes in my home, which violates the Second Amendment. So the victory in that case kind of established that yes, the Second Amendment is as it reads, those 27 words. Individuals do have the right to be protected by government, the right to be protected by government, to have a firearm in their home for self-defense. Now, the challenge was there was no incorporation possibility there, meaning that decision didn't get pushed down to the state. So that's where McDonald in Chicago came in.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have Illinois being a state like the 49 others. And that victory said, yep, this applies to the states, And so that kind of established that the Second Amendment is what it says, and individuals do have a right to keep and bear arms.
So it was not just these two cases, the Heller versus DC case, and I think we've had like 4 or 5 iterations of Heller versus DC, and then of course the McDonald versus City of Chicago. And how interesting, Otis McDonald was a Black man, Army veteran, who wanted to be protected in his home in Chicago. Things have not changed in Chicago.
Yeah.
But then the left comes along and says, okay, then the Second Amendment only applies to you in your house. It
Right.
does not apply when you go outside of your house, which to me is absolutely insidious, because that means that I only have freedom of speech in my house. I only have freedom of expression in my house. So then we had the New York case that was brought forward. Can you explain to us the New York case and that decision as well?
Well, my understanding, I mean, it kind of boils down to, I like to step back and look at it as, okay, we've established, the right to have arms, and then we have keep arms, right? Was Heller and McDonald. And bear, to me, bear is kind of covers in a broad sense that outside of the home, that right doesn't change. As you just said, I don't lose my right to free speech when I walk outside into the neighborhood, right?
That's correct. And so that case, it was successful, but you still have the pushback from the left looking at any kind of way that they can undermine people. So now in New York and some of these other places, New Jersey, they make it so difficult for people to be able to go out and acquire a concealed carry permit. Let's talk about something out there that is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure yours, because you're an expert on concealed carry, the National Reciprocity Act, which is very interesting in that if I have a driver's license here in the state of Texas, that does not say that I can only drive my car in the state of Texas.
Right.
I'm able to drive a car anywhere. I can rent a car in another state. But how interesting it is that when you go through all of the requirements of the concealed carry, understanding that the Second Amendment is supposed to be a constitutional right, that, your freedom of speech does not stop when you cross a state boundary. How important is it that we establish this national reciprocity for concealed carry holders?
Well, I think this one's sticky because in principle, absolutely yes. And driving is not even a right. That's a privilege. Right?
Yes.
The devil is in the details, because I think yes, we should absolutely, there should be no issue crossing state lines, with this. It's a fundamental right. It's defined in the Constitution. It's, been pushed down to the states or incorporation. No question there. The challenge is doing that without getting the federal government too much authority in this process. Right. So
Well,
I have to say, I would be a little worried about the details of how we do that. Right. How much power do the feds have in defining what this looks like state to state? And does it give them more control than they should have over the process?
And I think that's so important. And it comes back to who writes the legislation. And so
Mhm.
I think when you look at right now, the Republicans have control of the House of Representatives. It'd be a great thing. It probably won't pass in the Senate because we got Chuck Schumer over there. But we need to at least establish that to
Mhm.
say that this is a reason why we need to have the Senate so that we can get this passed and we can get the input from the National Association for Gun Rights, the Gun Owners of America, to make sure it's a strong constitutional base piece of legislation. Let's shift gears because we're talking about the federal government, how they get engaged. The alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, they have come
Mhm.
out with rule after rule. And of course, we're a constitutional republic. We're supposed to be governed by laws and not ruled by government agencies. And January, to surprise everyone, they came out with this whole pistol brace
Mhm.
rule that all of a sudden basically says to Americans that you're a felon if you
Yeah.
do not go on and register this to create a gun registry, which is something that we know leftists always like to do because it makes it easier to confiscate. So, talk to us about this pistol brace and how, this is not something that people should be following because it's a rule, it's not a law, it's not been passed in the House and the Senate and signed into law.
Yeah. It's the last time I read it in the Constitution, Article 1 is first for a reason. And that is
Mhm.
because the founders wanted the legislative bodies to have the most authority and the most power because they're deliberative and representative, right? The executive branch is supposed to implement and execute, to use exact wording, the laws established by the legislative branch. So there's a problem right there because I really do believe that the ATF is in a practical sense, making law with these regulations. On the pistol brace issue, they've gone back and forth over a few years now and said, no, it's fine. It's a pistol brace. It's still a pistol. That doesn't change what this thing is. And they said, well, no, you can't put it to your shoulder. And yes, you can. It doesn't change it into anything else. And they
Yeah.
don't know what they want, right? And now with pressure from the Biden administration, we're basically, I think, creating a law from the executive branch, right?
And
I
that's
don't think it'll stand
unconstitutional.
up in court. I
Yeah.
think it's very unconstitutional. But how long will that take, and what happens to the court in the meantime? You know?
It's so interesting because the pistol brace is an accessory. It's just the same as
Mhm.
if your wife, my wife, they go out and they buy a dress and they get a necklace or a bracelet to go along with the dress to
Mhm.
accessorize. It doesn't change the dress. It doesn't change
Mhm.
the color of the dress, the length of the dress, or whatever. So this pistol brace does not change the caliber. It does not change anything. You can't say you put a pistol brace on now all of a sudden it's a short barrel rifle. Well, what's a
Right.
short barrel rifle? What's the
Right.
difference between a short barrel rifle, long barrel rifle, whatever? And so, again, it comes back to this thing. We have got to make sure that we reclaim the language and we're specific on it because it's being manipulated by federal agencies so that they can create these rules to try to suppress and infringe upon our right to keep and bear arms.
It's an uphill battle. I just something just crossed my desk today that one of the things we look at in the industry, the shooting industry, is what's called NICS background check
Yes.
figures. And those are the how many people go through the FBI system to get a background check. Now, they correlate to gun purchases. They don't match exactly because there are other reasons to get the background check other than
Hmm.
purchasing a firearm. But in March, last month was the fourth largest ever month in terms of NICS background checks, over 3
Mm.
million. And 1.5 something million of those were firearm purchases. So what we're finding is that there's 80 some million Americans who say that they own a firearm. Now, many people will not say that because they don't trust the pollsters, right? I,
Yeah.
I wouldn't. But that number is continuing to grow because people are concerned. They realize that there's an infringement on their rights. They realize the government is saying, no, you're not important enough to defend yourself and your family. That's for us important people. We can have armed guards, but you
Yeah.
can't. So people see that and they're acting accordingly.
You know, when you look at what is happening in America, um, you got violent criminals that are being released back out into the streets. Assault. I mean, really violent. Criminality is peaking
Mhm.
up. The murders, the assaults, all of this, the rapes. You have this defunding of the police here in Austin, Texas. They defunded the police by 150 million, and the crime rate just skyrocketed. And now you have the left saying that we don't want you to have the ability to protect and defend yourself. Where does this go? Where does it end?
I think we see it end at the cash register. I mean, kind of following on to the point I was just making, it's the biggest gun purchase frenzy before this was when the Obama administration started to crack down on the point, on exactly what you just described. You don't get to defend yourself. That's for us, right? That's for the elites.
Yeah.
And people reacted with their pocketbooks, and they said, "Oh no, I'm self-reliant. I'm going to take care of myself and my family." I think that's step one, and that's powerful, right?
Yeah. Now, if I were to make the statement that the biggest incidents of violence using firearms, using weapons by criminals are in places where you have the largest amount of infringement upon legal law-abiding citizens to have firearms, would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, it would. And you know what analogy I like to use? We had a huge problem, and still do, with crystal meth on the streets, right? So our wise government decided that the right way to deal with that is to basically punish and restrict people that are sick with colds. So when I go to the drugstore now to buy Sudafed because I have a cold and I can't breathe, I get a background check. And you know what? I can't buy both 12-hour and 6-hour pills because I don't want to stay up all night, right? Because that's too many Sudafeds for a law-abiding sick person like me to get. Now, how's that worked? How has that solved the crystal meth problem? You and I both know that it's skyrocketing. It's off the charts. We have, that and opioids are going to kill over 100,000 people this year.
And fentanyl.
In our country. Right, you're right, and fentanyl. I mean, we're using the exact same strategy on this drug war, penalizing law-abiding citizens because it feels good and it's easy and it shows some sense of action. We did something, right?
Yeah.
But it's arguably completely ineffective.
Now, what's your recommendation? How can the everyday Joe and Jane six-pack out there make a difference? What do they need to read? What do they need to study? Who do they need to contact? How can they be better engaged? How can they link in with us here at the American Constitutional Rights Union? Let's talk about a call to action for the people that are on this webinar and who will see it afterwards.
I genuinely believe, and there's a series of steps, and I'll get to those, but I think the most important thing you can do right away is take an acquaintance shooting with you. If you have a 22, something nice and easy and gentle and fun, take a friend, take a distant friend, take someone from the office, take the family, take them to the range. I do this all the time. I did just this morning, family members from New Jersey, a very restricted state. Yeah. We had a great time. And guess what? They got factual information about firearms, about the Second Amendment, about what they are and what they aren't, firsthand. And they left a 2-hour range session with a whole new understanding. And they left able to tell now that what they hear on the TV is not necessarily so true, right? Whole new perspective. So I think the first step in this, if 80 million gun owners each took someone shooting, guess what? We have another 80 million people that have a new and accurate understanding of some of the issues related to the Second Amendment. And that kind of leads us into the next step of, okay, now we have a much bigger voice. And I don't care what their other political views are, right? I want them to understand the firearms issues. And, if they want to vote differently than me on some other topic, great. This is America. You get to do that. People fought and died for that right. Okay. But I want them to understand this issue so that we have not 80 million people, but 160 million people shouting at Congress, leave us alone.
I find that so interesting because that confrontation between Joe Biden and the union worker, I believe in Detroit, Michigan, where he said that, your AR-14s, that really shows that Joe Biden understands this issue. Or when you have the reporter on CNN saying that the weapon is now on full semi-automatic, my head just wants to explode. So once again, everyone go out and pick up Tom's book. The Practical Guide, let me get it right. Practical Guide to the United States Constitution by Tom McHale. And then also we have a couple other things here. ACRU publication, The Truth About Gun Control, Racism, and Genocide, because a lot of people don't realize that it was the Democrat Party who refused to allow Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to get a carry permit. And we can also look at historically how the left has, punished the Black community, inner city communities with gun control. And then this last one here, the Essential Second Amendment by the Heritage Foundation. We will have links up so that you can get all of those pieces of information. Tom, tell us how people can find your book and how they can get your book, The Practical Guide to the United States Constitution.
Yeah, it's available everywhere in hardback, paperback, Kindle, if you prefer that. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, orderable through any bookstore at this point. But the easy way is online. You can pick it up right away.
All right. We are now going to go and open it up so that we can have a conversation with you all that are out there watching this webinar. So I'm going to go over here, and Tracy Ann McCurry says, will there ever be a second chance or clean slate for ex-felons to be able to protect themselves? Tom, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer this with Tom's personal opinion. I won't say I'm speaking for any organization, but my view, the way the system is supposed to work, when if you've been convicted of a crime and you have served your sentence, you have paid your dues back to society, for example, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Now, depending on the issue, of course, violence is maybe a different scenario, but what we do see is a lot of people with administrative misdemeanor type issues that are denied fundamental rights. So I think it's something we got to look at.
I want to bring this point up to Tracy Ann. The Uvalde shooting, really, the shooter should have never been able to get any firearms if we, as we say, go by the letter of the law, because he lived with his grandparents and his grandfather was a felon. And as the law states, a felon is not supposed to, number one, possess firearms, or be in a home or a residence with firearms. So when he put down his grandparents' address, which was the address of his grandfather, that should have been a red flag. And let's talk about that real quick. What's your sensing about these red flag laws? Because I think there's a real thin line where it sounds great, but can also be used against, political enemies. And Gary J. Willis, look up this case. Gary J. Willis of Ferndale, Maryland, 61 years of age, shot at his doorstep because they were serving a red flag order against him at like 4:00 in the morning. To this day, no one knows who shot Gary J. Willis. No one knows who implemented the red flag order. What are your thoughts on red flag laws?
The devil's in the details, right?
Yeah.
The scariest thing about red flag laws is the guilty until proven innocent scenario. All it really takes, a lot of states have these now, and all it really takes is an accusation. And there are a whole lot of reasons. And this kind of goes back to the felony question I answered. I mean, there are a lot of situations where somebody can make an accusation and it sticks enough, especially in the presence of a red flag law, to do damage to the receiving person. Bad divorce, bad breakup, whatever the scenario, people get angry with each other. And I think the important thing when we do this, no one wants somebody violent or to have access to a firearm. But on the other hand, you got to be real careful about making sure they have a right to meet their accuser, right? They have a right to respond and deal with that situation. So,
and you bring up a great point, if I can transition. So, when my daughter was getting her master's at Southern Methodist University, and molecular cellular biology, I ain't smart enough to understand it, but she would have to spend some late nights over there on campus, and SMU is an open campus. Well, guess what old Dad did? Dad gave her one of his 9mm, and of course I took her to the range, get her to understand, be proficient with it. But today, what the left is talking about, they would make me into a criminal for
Mhm.
giving my daughter a weapon to be able to protect herself. And just the same as if you're a woman out there concerned about an ex-husband or someone that has been threatening you, and you go to Tom McHale and say, Tom, can I borrow a 22? Can I borrow a little 380 or a 9mm? Now, all of a sudden, you do something out of the good of your heart. This administration wants to see you as a criminal. I mean, that to me
Mhm.
seems just out of whack.
Well, and that's kind of one of the dangers of the whole universal background check concept.
Yes.
If you and I are together living in the same state, and you're a perfectly legal, you have every right to own a firearm. I can't lend you a gun for the day at the range. If you wanted to go hunting, whatever, right? That would require a background check transaction.
It's just amazing,
Yeah.
to loan, or like I say, to temporarily give someone a firearm if they're in one of these states where they have to wait 2 weeks. And there are some
Mhm.
cases where women have been killed during that 2 week waiting period, and they weren't able to have any protection. All right, let's go to the next question.
Mhm.
Okay, Brenda Guess asks, how many of these shooters have left sympathies? And when you say left sympathies, are you talking about left leaning? I guess that's what you're saying. Uh, I would tell you that you see a lot of them. You know how
Mhm.
funny it is that someone can leave Illinois, a Bernie Sanders supporter, and go down and shoot the Republican congressional baseball team that's practicing. We didn't talk about gun control after that because this was someone that was aligned with a left leaning philosophy. So, do we really see a lot of NRA members, legal law abiding citizens going out there and committing these acts of violence?
This is an area where you can actually don't take my word for it. Um, Go look up the statistics on concealed carry permit holders and crime. And what you'll find is that the crime rate among concealed carry permit holders is less than the crime rate of active duty uniformed police officers. Now, that is no slant at all on police officers. They do a yeoman's job and an impossible task. I'm just making the point that these people are the most law abiding segment in our
Mm-hmm.
society because they have voluntarily gone out and said, yep, background check me. I'm going to do this. I'm going to follow all the rules. I'm going to get the correct paperwork and I'm going to do this right. They're not the kind of people who commit crimes, right? Um, I'll
Well,
leave
I
it at
mean,
that.
yeah, Nashville shows us what happened. And of course, Louisville, I don't know his political leanings, but I do know that he was on antidepressants and medications for mental illness. So we have got to do better with that. Next
Mhm.
question, please. KB asks, the majority of the country is clearly opposed to more ineffective gun control, but legislatures and the executive branches continue marching forward. What can we do? First of all, you need to be more involved with your state legislature and definitely your federal legislators. But as Tom just talked about, the executive branch is not supposed to be out there making law. That is up to the legislative branch. This is a representative democracy. Tom, you want to add on to that?
Yes, I would. And the reason, and I was not at all being funny. The reason I said the most important thing you can do is take somebody shooting is because I want people to stand up in Democratic primaries and ask, okay, I know what all your other views are. What are your views on more gun control? I want Democrats and those on the left to start asking those questions. I think that's one of the most important things we can do because I think votes were so polarized these days. They go left or right on all issues, right? I
Yeah,
want those questions to pop up. I want those questions to pop up on CNN, right?
yeah.
I want liberals to ask those questions. Like I don't see a problem with owning a gun for home defense, and why are you restricting that right?
It's interesting because recently, back at the end of February, beginning March, I was up on Capitol Hill talking to members of the Second Amendment Caucus, all Republicans, sadly. But I ran into Lois Frankel, who's a Democrat from South Florida. And she recognized me because I was a representative from South Florida. And she asked me, well, Alan, what are you doing up here? And I said, well, I'm up here speaking on behalf of some Second Amendment issues, national reciprocity, the Hearing Protection Act, getting rid of this pistol brace rule. And she said, well, I don't, I'm not with this gun thing. I don't think people should have them. I mean, now, folks, this is your congressional representative. that does not believe that you should be able to have this constitutional right. And you're right.
Mhm.
When you are assaulted, when you are attacked, a criminal does not come up to you and say, "Hey, Tom, are you a Republican or a Democrat?"
That's right.
If you answer Democrat, I won't shoot you. Okay, they don't. And so the Second Amendment protects everybody. You know, a book that I want everyone to read is a short essay by a French economist written back in 1850 called The Law by Frederick Bastiat, Bastiat. Understand what the purpose of the law is. The purpose of the law is to protect your life, your liberty, and your property. You cede that over to the government to do that, but you inherently have that right yourself. And so we got to go back and reassert that. Next question, please.
Can I jump in here
Yeah,
for one
go, Tom.
second?
Go, Tom.
Just in case it gets missed, because there's a lot flying by. I see one from Annie Parkinson, and she asked, "Have you seen a big increase in women buying firearms?"
Oh,
And
huge.
I wanted to address that because
Yeah,
yes, it's skyrocketing. Not only women,
yeah,
but minorities too.
yes,
I love this. Um, everybody, everybody has the same rights under our Constitution for
yes.
self-preservation.
You've got the Well-Armed Woman. That's an organization out there. You got the Jan Morgan out of Arkansas, heads up the 2A Women, Second Amendment Women. So there are a lot of organizations. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of shooting ranges that has ladies' night.
Mhm.
And you also have a lot of female concealed carry trainers out there because some women would prefer to be trained by another woman. So Annie, please go out there and talk to your local gun store, gun range, and find out some of these programs. Okay, next question. John Welch, what is the difference between a legal and illegal militia? Tom?
I was going to throw that one back at you.
Oh, well, sure. I will tell you that the Second Amendment defines what the legal militia is. It's a law-abiding citizen, American citizen that has this right. And that's in the Constitution. That's our Bill of Rights. If you want to talk about an illegal militia, I say Antifa is an illegal militia. And of
That's a good
course,
point.
we've seen what happens. I think that any organization or any group of people that go out there and they take up arms to undermine the fabric and the nature of this constitutional republic, that's an illegal militia. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why we look at Antifa. They should be a domestic terrorist organization. When you're out there attacking police, as we saw in Atlanta, and we see all across the country, that is an illegal militia if you want to use it that way. And 27 words, Second Amendment, pretty easy, pretty specific. Let's take a couple of more questions, please. And then we'll let everyone go for the night. And we just thank you so much for taking kind of time out of your busy schedules. And of course, we're going to replay this webinar. It'll be archived, and we can always make sure that someone at the staff of the American Constitutional Rights Union can answer your questions later on. But let's take two more, Miss Producer. Hello, two more questions. Oh, did she shut us off?
I see one.
Okay.
Who is buying more, Dems or Republicans? And it's virtually impossible. The Nix data doesn't show that preference. There's no questionnaire on that topic. But
Yeah.
Anecdotally, boy, I hear from a whole lot of friends and acquaintances that are on the more left side of things than I am, that have completely changed their mind and said, you know what, I need to look into this because the world's a dangerous place and it's up to me. The police are wonderful and do a fabulous job, but they can't get here in 3 seconds when I need them. They'll get here in 10 minutes.
I always tell people when the day comes that I can carry a police officer on my hip, then I will not carry a weapon on my hip. And the response time is about you. Remember, your first inalienable right given to you, endowed to you by the Creator God, is life. And you have to protect your life. And that's what the Second Amendment gives to you, that constitutional right to self-defense and protecting yourself. So I guess that is it for tonight. Thank you so very much, Tom, McHale. Again, Everyone, go out there and pick up his book, The Practical Guide to the United States Constitution by Tom McHale. Subscribe to the American Handgunners magazine, where he is an editor. And please join us at the American Constitutional Rights Union, because we believe that in order to live free, you have to be a citizen. In order to be a citizen, you have to be armed. If not, you are a subject and you will never be free. So God bless you all. Thanks again, Tom, and have a great night.
Thank you, Colonel.